already joining, so I think we're going to get started. Thank you everybody for joining today. Super exciting debut for our hyper webinar that we're starting here, a series of monthly webinars focused on risk management. We are looking here at hosting guests starting next show. So this show is the first one. Will just be me introducing a little bit about myself, and then a little bit about cyber risk management and why it does not need to be so painful. And then after that, starting next month, we're going to have some amazing guests coming on, and we have really actually an amazing lineup of committed guests that more information will be coming soon on. So super exciting. So let's get started here. So just a little bit of background about myself. I'm Yair Solo, founder, CEO of Centraleyes. I'm a former senior executive at Visa, the credit card brand. Spent a number of years at Visa on their business side, and in my last role there, I got to see a lot of the innovation pieces starting at Visa. And through that, really got to see a lot of cyber risk, privacy, and a lot of the gaps in the market around cyber risk management, which is where I founded SciGov, which has recently turned into Centraleyes 4 years ago. We spent around a year and a half conducting a tremendous amount of research in the market, looking and talking to CISOs, risk specialists, risk officers, and really trying to understand what those pain points in the market are around cyber risk. We after around a year and a half of research, started to build a tool. Today, we're not going to talk too much about the tool. At the end, I'll just spend around 1 minute on what we do and a little bit more in depth. But really, the majority of today's session will be focused on how you can make cyber risk less painful. We're super excited about this topic and then the topics that are coming. So why is cyber risk management so painful? So we start with the fact that there's a tremendous amount of manual processes that are going on in organizations today. Cyber risk in general is an area that has tremendously grown over the last 5 years for a variety of reasons. The number one reason is our dependency on technology. I think over the last 10 months during COVID, we all got to see how much of the world is dependent on technology, and how much we all have become dependent on, our remote workstations, our video conferencing, our SaaS tools, and so on. If we look at schools and hospitals and other businesses, everybody has become a lot more remote and a lot more dependent on the technology. And with that amazing ability to do things from far, come a lot of new risks as well. Second part is that the cyber risk management is very time consuming, and it's time consuming because there is a very big manual piece here of collecting data from different sources. Often questionnaires is that number one source that you're collecting data from. And a lot of the questionnaires can't necessarily disappear, and we'll talk about some of the recent attacks that have impacted the market and why people and processes are just as big of a piece as is technology. But at the same time, collecting that qualitative data is very difficult today. First, understanding what you need to collect, and then understanding, who are those people in the organization who can supply you with that information and getting them to share that. In parallel to that, we have a tremendous amount of systems and platforms in place that are providing us with active security and all kinds of other operational pieces like, platforms that help with HR or finances or other areas. And those platforms often have a lot of data in them that could help us understand where more risks lie. So how do we grab information from internal systems as well and make that a little bit more simple? Today, it's very hard. It's very manual. You have to go and find data logs, different settings, check things manually. The third piece of data coming in the collection process is that external feed of data, and trying to understand what are those new threats and risks that evolve around my organization from the outside in. As much as we can help and protect our organizations from within, often there's factors happening outside the organization which you need to be aware of in order to prioritize and focus your defenses as well. So the third piece here I'm going to talk about is the repetitive tasks and goals here, reinventing the wheel, what we call it. So looking at different tasks here that are super inefficient in the process, The collection of information for multiple tasks, like different frameworks we're trying to meet from a risk management perspective, and different areas that we're trying to understand what's going on in multiple times for different reasons is very inefficient. So how do we create better efficiencies there, with that pain of doing a lot of manual processes and repeating that very redundant type of work that we see in risk management. The fourth piece, and maybe the most important one, and these aren't necessarily in the order of importance, is connecting the risk to the business. This is a very difficult task, and it's very hard to manage, and it's very hard to communicate this as well, both internally and externally. And the reason for that is because your cyber risk is a technical risk, yet your business risk is something that has to do with your day-to-day operations. And connecting those two, number one, is very hard because often the technical risks are not directly connected to your business risk, and you have to create visibility and an understanding of which technical risks can affect which parts of your business. And that part becomes very complex. And at the same time, explaining that to your senior leadership also becomes very complex because it's not enough to understand that. You then need to communicate that to the C-suite, to the board of directors, to shareholders sometimes, to explain to them what is necessary to properly protect your business when you connect that cyber and technical risk to your business risk. The fifth area here is constantly changing environment. And what was true yesterday may not be true today. I think we all saw some of the recent attacks, like in the FireEye SolarWinds, which we'll talk about a little bit more shortly. But that's the type of thing where there's a new vulnerability out there that potentially could affect thousands and many thousands of very high profile businesses and government agencies, leading to tremendous amount of damage. And I don't think that the damage in that specific attack is even close to being known yet. We're right at the beginning of that, but very clear that suddenly this risk that didn't exist yesterday became the number one risk in cyber today for thousands and thousands of businesses. Some of them had to actually remove that program or take it offline until they patched it. And even the patch itself, there's questions about, is it secure enough or not, after that type of vulnerability is exposed, and that's expected, right? The reputational damage to a security firm after one of their tools are exposed here is something that causes a very big lack of confidence in that software, and your people are hesitant often to put it back, but yet sometimes they're dependent on that for that operational risk and that ongoing day-to-day management. And the last piece here is around compliance, and that's an area of how you follow the rules and regulations, which constantly are changing, right? We have rules today and regulations and standards and frameworks that were being mandated down often by different regulators. The most recent one is the Department of Defense's CMMC framework, which is put down. And even in CMMC, you've seen changes to the requirements there and the process around it within a few weeks of different decisions being made there. So, 1 week we had one decision, 3 or 4 weeks later, the requirement adjusted, added a different layer of, a preemptive kind of framework, self-assessment that you need to do, and all kinds of things like that, that you need to constantly be following. Frameworks like PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, FFIC, they come out with new revisions, right? All the NIST frameworks are often being updated, and staying on top of those changes is hard in itself, and then understanding how those changes affect your organization is even more complex. So this is kind of the main pain points we see across risk management and why today it is quite painful. And maybe we'll take a few minutes here just to talk about some of the recent attacks and lessons learned here. Specifically looking at the FireEye SolarWinds issue there. And then also there was a recent attack out of Israel that hit one of the largest insurance companies in Israel. And it didn't get such international headlines because these things happen every day around the world. But Israel is actually a place which rarely gets attacked on a national level, with large organizations falling victim to cyber attacks. And I think 2 weeks ago was one of the those pinnacle moments where we saw a large attack on an insurance company that held a lot of sensitive personal identifiable information and personal health records of very high profile people, both government agency individuals, defense leaders and things like that. And then what happened is that the hackers there, started to release the information, demanding the ransomware be paid. At first, there was a clear a policy not to negotiate with them, and like in most cases, once that data starts to get released, the power moves to the other side of the table. And if there's enough to lose, and there was plenty to lose here, the insurance company took that conversation offline, and seems to be resolving that directly with people who have hacked them. So that's actually disappeared from the news in the last week and a half. But you can rest assured that, number one, a lot of sensitive information has already been released. Number two, they're going to probably end up having to pay ransomware. And number three, everybody can just imagine the reputational damage that's been caused to an insurance company that suffers a breach like that. If you were to be offered an insurance policy, to purchase one from a company that was just recently breached, and their information of people was being released, and personal information was appearing on the headlines of the newspaper, you'd probably move on to the next insurance company. So that damage there is really quite large. Now, specifically about the Shearbeat attack, we actually did a little bit of research there, using our team of researchers and analysts. We saw three different areas that I think you need to pay attention to. It doesn't necessarily mean that these were 100% used in this attack, but this is at least what the initial information indicates. And one of them is just around their email server not being patched properly, and the ability for the hackers to get into the unpatched email server, collected intelligence through there. Right? Once you're in the email server, it doesn't necessarily mean that's where they're going to take and act on their attack. That's just another maybe step in the direction of collecting enough information to then hit really hard later on and know how to navigate through the organization in a way that they go undetected. So having visibility to information and personal emails, and knowing the different players in the organization, allowed them to travel through the organization in a lateral way and collect a lot of information that helped them then exploit and steal that information. The second piece is around the specific VPN that's been publicized that they were using, which had a known vulnerability on it. So making sure that even your VPN services, which you think are there to help you protect yourselves, are properly protected. It's been known that this VPN service, I'm not going to mention the name, but it's been known that this VPN service has been quite exposed for a while now, and trying to deal with that. But that was apparently left open there, which left an option to deploy malware there, and then affect the access control of the organization, which allowed the attackers to get into the network, different logins, see the flow logs, and then all this could have been prevented with proper patch management and making sure you're staying on top of your critical vulnerabilities. And the last piece here, and this again is going off of intelligence information that we've collected, but is not verified yet. So I'm putting that disclaimer out there, but it would seem at least like that there may have been insider help as well. And this is something, regardless of this specific attack, you and as an organization always need to be thinking about the insider threat. The insider threat is a very big threat to the organization, and something that we need to pay attention to. It could be existing employees, and it especially could be rogue former employees who are maybe disgruntled and upset at the company and then trying to revenge. And then that in turn leads to them either trying to cause damage or collaborating with people who want to cause damage to the organization. Sometimes it's driven by financial means, and sometimes it's just for plain old revenge. So that's something that you need to pay attention to. I'll make one point about the FireEye attack there and the breach there with SolarWinds. I think that's specifically the SolarWinds. You see how a vendor, a third party, leads to a breach into organizations, and it would seem quite a critical one. So pay attention to your vendors and the risks around them. Your vendor risk is a very big area of concern, and if you're not running a vendor risk program today, I would urge you to certainly put a more focus on that area and build up a vendor risk program as soon as possible, especially for those critical vendors that control very sensitive data or access to your network. So how do we make cyber risk management less painful? I'll start with a few free resources that we have come across from NIST, and the National Vulnerability Database, as well as some others here that have been very helpful, especially when you're getting started. First of all, start with the fact that the NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework, in our eyes, is the leading framework for risk management today in the world. It's based on the special publications of 853, and being able to use these different publications to address different risk management frameworks in your organization is very important. The NIST CSF is a very achievable and really comprehensive framework that is really good for corporations around the world. There's different abilities there to also look at a critical control view there, so you can start with a smaller segment of controls there that you focus on. But that's something you should strive to as an organization, to be constantly measuring and creating a baseline for your risk levels there. And then from there, creating the ability to improve and remediate over time, so that the gaps that are found are constantly being remediated by focusing on the areas that you need to protect the most. The National Vulnerability Database is a great database the U.S. government puts out, with a repository there of different known vulnerabilities, with scoring there, so that if you're not following that, you certainly should, and you certainly should be following for the platforms you have in place today. That's another really good resource. CVE details, and specifically their security vulnerability data source, is another one on vendors and products that you can use to understand if any of your products are exposed, and where you should be more concerned, or ensuring that you're either patching them or maybe removing them if they're vulnerable and not patched. And OpenVAS is an open source vulnerability scanning tool, which again, if you don't have a vulnerability scanner in place, another free tool that is quite effective. And it may not be on the level of things like Tenable, Qualys, or Rapid7 or others, but not far behind, and much better than ignoring that piece. So really a really good tool there. Now maybe just to the last piece here, looking at best practices here that can be put into place for the organization. So number one, I would urge you to first of all protect your crown jewels, identifying your most critical business assets, and making sure that those critical assets, the pieces of your organization that if that gets breached, leaked, or hacked, can ruin your organization or really disrupt business in a critical way, you need to prioritize from a defense and protection level. So you have to first identify those assets and understand what those are, and then start to strategically put your defenses around those different, what we call crown jewels, in order to protect them. And when you think about your data, don't just think about what is my most sensitive data. Also think about which platforms and which systems in your organization can actually stop your business from operating, right? And it could be, if you're a bank and your ATM machines are running on some kind of Windows application, then you have to know that you have to be able to protect those. Otherwise, that entire business line can go down, and we've seen that as an example in some of the global attacks that happened in WannaCry and other times where ATMs were attacked. The same is true in hospitals for healthcare, right? So it's no longer just your data; it's also sometimes your physical assets that are controlled by IT and OT. The second piece is put your strategy over your technology. Don't think that if you're going to deploy different solutions in place and just plug in more tools, that's going to solve your problem. If you look at all the attacks that we've seen, including the two we mentioned today, and every single other attack just about out there, almost always, especially the more strategic attacks, are a combination of a failure of people, processes, and tools. And often the people and processes is actually where the greatest failure happens. So making sure that you have a strategy in place, and that that you're having a way to look at the full picture as a CISO, as a risk officer, somebody who's responsible for risk for your organization, is super important. And being able to create this plan, which then helps you prioritize, okay, which tools are more important and which policies or procedures are more important, will help you prioritize. You'll look at things beyond just proper cyber risk straight up, things like physical security, maybe intelligence outside the organization, how you're collecting that information, training and awareness in areas like that. Your supply chain, your vendors, we mentioned that almost 60% of companies have experienced a breach due to a third-party vendor. This number is just growing. This is an area that hackers see as a easy way in. You often just assume that your vendors are protected, and that's the wrong assumption. Many vendors are not protected. Many vendors are very vulnerable. And even if they are protected today, they may not be protected tomorrow. So you should be constantly managing and monitoring those vendors, and B, you should have tools that help you monitor on a regular basis if there are new vulnerabilities or patches out on those vendors, and also looking for the vendor's information appearing in sensitive places like the darknet or public web, or having their credentials stolen in a third party or fourth party breach is something you should be monitoring, either using tools or doing those searches yourself, but certainly being able to monitor your vendors. Fourth, best practice here would be getting support from higher up, right? You have to get buy-in from top management and executives. The board needs to be more aware. There used to be a notion of, I'm just going to tell the board everything's okay because otherwise it looks like I'm not doing my job. And I think that the paradigm has changed here. The narrative needs to be, here are the tools that we need to properly protect ourselves. No organization is 100% protected. And therefore, if we can put into place, first of all, and get alignment on the senior leadership level around what are those priorities of the organization, what tools, what programs, and what resources do we need, and then what budgets to follow, that will certainly get a much more sound and strategic risk management program, specifically around cyber and information security, because that's when you have the ability to really do the right thing, or sometimes you're buying things or getting tools just because you have certain budgets left over, but you're not necessarily looking at the most critical pieces, but rather just the easiest ones to purchase because that's what management will approve right now, and that's what it is. And the last piece is, and we mentioned this earlier, is connecting your risks to your business. This is not a simple task, but you can start by the simple exercise of first understanding what are those critical business assets that you own today, and then focusing your efforts and your defenses around those to make sure that those are properly protected and you feel confident that those will not be breached. And then from there, expanding it to secondary areas of the business that can be affected as well. And I think that if we use these best practices and implement them in your organization, you will certainly find that the level of protection goes up. And these would be a great first step in establishing your risk management program, turning this like very scary notion of cyber risk into this very painful process into something that's not quite as painful. And once you've established these 5 building blocks and best practices here, you can continuously grow the program and mature it over time, constantly improving and adding more value there as you've built out this program. And with that, I summarize the session here. I'm just going to spend around 1 minute, a little bit on our solution here for those of you who are not aware. Centraleyes is a active risk management platform. We've created a platform that sits in AWS today. It's a multi-tenant and serverless application that has 3 different solutions in it. One that's called first party that addresses internal risk and compliance, third party for vendor risk, and board for executive reporting. We take these 3 tools and we help streamline a lot of the manual processes today into an automated and orchestrated risk management program, which really becomes alive and is constantly improving and helping you make the right decisions in real time as those risks evolve over time. The dashboards and reporting level in the platform today are very focused in enabling you to understand just by looking at a visual and quantifiable metric of where your biggest gaps are and where you need to prioritize your efforts forward are. And taking live feeds from both inside the organization and outside the organization so that in real time, all the pieces are connected for you in a single pane of glass, number one, lowers your risk levels and also allows you to meet compliance in parallel, really reducing the time you spend on audits and assessments towards that compliance by up to 80% of your time, which is a tremendous amount of saving, not necessarily even to save that time, but actually to reprioritize your time now towards more important tasks, while in parallel, you have this program continuously protect your company. With that, we are going to summarize and conclude this webinar. Really appreciate all of your attendance today, and I look forward to our next session in January. With this point, I would like to wish you all a happy holidays and a happy new year, and wishing you all and the rest of us around the globe really a new year to come with health and the new beginning, and hopefully, a much better 2021 than what we saw in 2020 from a global health perspective. Thank you very much and have a great day. Take care.